According to our sources, the following men made up the roster of the 1966 St. Francis Xavier football team. We're going to get right into it. I hope we're going to get right into it. Yes, we are going to. Terry Arneson, Bryce Bell, Jim Benton, Paul Brule, John Burke, Stan Butkus, Bob Charette, Grover Coffin, Skip Corrigan, Terry Dolan, Mike Dory, Alan Gillis, Ted Goodwin, John Gorman, Terry Gorman, Gregory Gosling, Phil Hughes, John McKeveney, Bill Kelly, Don Loney, Mike McDonald, Neil McDonald, Bernie McLean, Burns McPherson, Packy McFarland, Tazo Meir, Peter Montague, Carol Morgan, Bill Morris, Jay Nash, Dick Pandolfo, John Pike, John Purcell, Bill Raboli, Terry Ryan, Peter Sayre, Paul Schoenhart, Randy Scott, James Scher, Paul Smith, Helmut Stoichel, Michael Stoneham, Wally Straps, and Gary Yabsley. These are the men that were on that original 1966 St. Francis Xavier football team who will be inducted in a few minutes. Perhaps we can give a hand for all of them, some of whom aren't with us tonight. Since the stage would collapse if we had them all come up, we'll ask Jim Shea and Paul Brule, the co-captains, to please come up and take our chairs of honor while we read the induction talk. With those two gentlemen, Jim Shea and Paul Brule, please come forward. When the newspapers printed the 1966 Canadian University football rankings, nobody was surprised when 5 upper Canadian teams were ahead of St. Francis Xavier. Nova Scotians were used to being ignored in any poll constructed in Ontario. X opened with Shearwater. The game did much to bolster the confidence of the young Antigonish players when they beat the far more experienced Flyers 46-8. Paul Brule and Terry Arneson showed flashes of what the season would bring when they scored 2 and 3 touchdowns, respectively. Coach Don Loney did his best to knock the starch out of his upstarts by warning them that there were far more difficult opponents to be faced, but the young club needed an object lesson. They walked jauntily into their second preseason contest against Queens and proceeded to go down 23 points in the first quarter. And though they came back and beat Queens in the last 3 quarters, they lost the game eventually 30-12. Pandolfo and Gorman scored majors for the X-Men. The team, now realizing that they could be trounced as well as trounce, practiced with a different attitude between that game and their regular season opener. They faced Shearwater again in their first regular season game. Schoenhart, Arneson, Stoneham, and Corrigan all scored, with Morris and Pandolfo scoring 2 touchdowns apiece. Their second meeting with the Flyers going the same way as the preseason game, this time by a score of 51-6. Football practice became problematic at X when the lights started to fade in the fall because some of the players had classes that went till 5 o'clock. No one, however, was going to get out of a Don Loney practice, no matter how good the excuse. So Loney, ever the perfectionist, started to hold practices for the first time ever, commencing at 5:30 and finishing under the lights at one end of the field. It must have worked because in the second regular season game, they once again snuck by their opponents, shutting out Mount Allison while scoring 58 points themselves. Arneson added 2 more touchdowns to his season total. Brule added 3 to his as he rushed for 205 yards, and Phil Hughes was singled out by the press for having played an outstanding defensive game. Their next opponents were at least as easy as Schoenhart, Corrigan, and Gorman each scored, and Brule moved into first place in the scoring title as he romped home with 5 touchdowns against the hapless Dalhousie University, which went down the same way as X's previous opponents, 54-0. The coach is rightfully seeing these victories as total team affairs, instigated an award to be presented to the outstanding defensive player of the game. They called it fittingly the Skull Award. The recipient in the Dow game was Tazo Meir. John Burke won the Skull Award, and Brule scored 3 more touchdowns when they beat UNB 47-12 in their 4th regular season game. St. Dunstan's proved to be just as easy as they went down 47-0. under the onslaught of Arneson and Corrigan's two TDs apiece and Brulet's 3. It was at this point in the season that disgruntled Blue Nose Conference opponents dubbed the 14 regular defensemen on the X squad the Dirty Dozen. This Baker's dozen plus one was made up of 9 veterans and 5 freshmen. Acadia proved no tougher in the 5th game as they went down 39-0, with Corrigan again scoring 2, Straps scoring 1, and Brule saving the typesetter's lead by repeating his by now commonplace 3 TDs. The score at halftime in that one was only 7-0, but a little Loney juice up at the interval put the club back on form, and the X-Men outscored the Axemen 32-0 in the second half. It appeared that the honeymoon might be over, however, when they faced undefeated St. Mary's in the final regular season game. St. Mary's had pretty much beaten the same teams that X had. A couple of things happened in that game which appeared to be bad when they occurred, but ironically worked out in favor of the X-Men. Dick Pandolfo had been starting quarterback throughout the season. St. Mary's had him well scouted and had spent all their practice time dealing with Pandolfo, whose habit of rolling out had been credited with being a large part of the success of the St. X offense. Smoot was prepared for it and held X to a slim 6-point lead at halftime. It was still anybody's ball game. The two seeming disastrous events were a game-ending injury to Pandolfo and a touchdown run by St. Mary's speedster Ted Purnell from Ottawa. These disasters turned out to be to X's advantage when Pandolfo's replacement rookie Terry Dolan, an excellent drop-back passer, had the effect of nullifying the special defense against the rollout that St. Mary's had spent so much time preparing. The second turnaround was the reaction Ted Purnell's run had on the whole of the St. X team. It seems that Purnell broke loose very close to the line of scrimmage and basically had a free 72-yard run down the sideline. As he approached the X bench, and for the entire time he's going past them, he threw them the finger. We'll never know, because halftime talks are private affairs, but better than even money has it that it was given just the odd mention in the X locker room at halftime. Whatever the reason, St. X outplayed the Huskies for the rest of the game, won the conference title 27-15. Arneson scored, as did Schoenhardt, and once again Brule accounted for most of the X running yardage on his way to 2 touchdowns. The victory was considered, once again, a total team affair. There being no national championship in those days, it appeared as if X would have to be content with success at home. The damper on the very successful season was, of course, their early loss to Queens in the preseason, leaving those in Ontario smug in their feeling that X might certainly be the best of the lot down here, but that Queens' victory showed the superiority of Upper Canadian football. They could have been content in their superior attitude had it not been for the efforts of a man by the name of Pete Gorman, who thought that the time was ripe for the first ever bowl game in Canada, pitting the best of the East against the best of the real East. How many times have you heard us, Montreal and Ontario, referred to as the East? He founded the forerunner of the Vanier Cup, called at the time the Save the Children Bowl. Ontario champions, the Waterloo Lutheran Golden Hawks, coached by the infamous Tuffy Knight, were selected as the representatives of the East, and St. X were selected to represent the real East. Fate was at work to make sure the disparity between the two sections of the country was in everybody's mind. While Waterloo Lutheran were being feted as the guests of Maple Leaf Gardens by virtue of Harold Ballard's son Bill being a member of that team, X was busy arranging ground transportation up to Toronto because the airline mechanics were on strike. Even that problem might have worked in their favor because hundreds of fans gave them a wonderful, colorful send-off as they entrained for Toronto. Be that as it may, 13,000 tickets were sold to fans who came out to see the would-be slaughter. Slaughter it was, but not the slaughter they expected. X beat the Ontario champs 40-12.